Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to the Institute for Personal Development, Kriya Yoga Ashram, where total consciousness is the new frontier.
Kriya Yoga is union of the individual with the divine. Join us as we explore the practices to initiate this process.
Good morning. Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. Let's talk consciousness. I am your hostess, Lisa Winton, and with me is Kenny Toy, also known as Swami Jayananda, founder of the Institute for Personal Development, located here in Hampton, New Hampshire. Good morning, Swami. Thank you for being here today. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing pretty good today. How about you?
I'm doing pretty good today, too. Thanks for asking. And thank you all for tuning in. Today on the Voice of Yoga, we will talk about the supremacy of spiritual reality over the mental concept which is appearing as physical form. Listen as we discuss the workings of divine law and its pragmatic application. Humanity says, show and I will trust. Spirit says, trust and I will show. In this show, we will be explaining the principle of faith by sowing to the spirit and its benefits. Divine law comes into your experience through your consciousness. Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. We are talking consciousness. Join the Kriya Yoga Spiritual Advance to get the light in your soul and live under divine law. Swami, the title of today's show is Spiritual Truth over Material Appearance. So what exactly is spiritual truth?
Yeah, spiritual truth is really the presence of this one divine life that underlies everything in creation. And everything's going to become dependent upon whether we sow to the flesh, which is the sensual, or things that are visible and tangible, or invisible and tangible, matter and mind, or we sow to the spirit, which is spirit is the void or the nothing. It is the invisible, intangible divine presence that we're talking about. And do I have a belief in two powers, which is the flesh, the sensual, the material, the mental? Or do I have a belief in the one power, which is the absolute? The two powers come under what's called the law of karma, which is basic reciprocity, that whatever we're putting out, there is an equal and an opposite reaction. And then divine law is the absolute. It is the belief in one power. And in this realm, and in this experience of absolute harmony, there is no conflict and there's no competition, there's no contrast.
So my understanding of the title is that, so the material appearance, which is what I see before me, myself, and I, and everything around me. So I have to overcome material appearance by activating the spiritual truth.
Right. Because when spirit is cause, creation is perfect. So it really behooves us to make this shift, to acknowledge the presence of this invisible, intangible principle that for most of us, it really goes unconscious, that we have a belief in a concept of God, but in truth, we are unconscious to the presence of this divine principle. And we really want to try and figure out, how do we do this? Because when spirit is cause, creation is perfect, sounds great. But there's something that I must do, that my desire to achieve an objective must be consciously transmuted from this mental, material perspective to this spiritual light. And that's what we're really trying to focus on, how to make spiritual science a demonstrable principle that you can use on a pragmatic, real level?
So I think I'm understanding that. So I'm sleeping in my senses when I look around me and I see poverty and I recognize the poverty, and I recognize if I see, for example, a homeless person, so if I recognize all of that, I'm sleeping in my senses, and therefore I cannot have this spiritual truth, the spiritual awareness.
Right. And for a lot of us, that's 180 degrees from the way we are brought up. We're brought up to react to the testimony of our senses. We're brought up to believe in matter. That's what we trust. And in this model, we're learning, just like we said in the opening, that humanity says, show, and I will trust. And Spirit says, trust, and I will show. So this belief in what is invisible and intangible is what we're calling faith. That to actually have faith in what does not appear in your senses, because there really is no lack for this divine presence, that this principle is everywhere and in everything. It is the one power, the self-existent in this universe. Everything else is just a thought about that divine consciousness, about that divine presence. And whatever it is that we hold in our consciousness is what's going to outpicture in our experience. Again, coming back to my desire to achieve an objective, it must be consciously transmuted from the sense perception to this spiritual understanding. And thus my desire for perfection, satisfaction, and success means that my to-do in all things is watch and pray. Not from the perspective of a physical being struggling to fix or somehow manipulate this material shadow, but from the light of the spiritual understanding that I have of my perfect, ever satisfying, and always successful spiritual identity that must therefore cast a corresponding shadow. So rather than reacting to the testimony of our senses and saying, oh, look at this poor person over here, we actually abide in the truth that that's not a poor person over there. That is this one divine presence appearing in my consciousness as a poor person. And from that perspective, changing your understanding of what it is that's before you, you actually change that appearance.
Now, is that what we mean by when we talk about true spiritual healing?
Right. You have to start with the principle. You must start with the understanding that when spirit is cause, creation is perfect. You must know that to be the truth of your being. And that's what we have been doing, say, in these past shows where we're talking about changing our asana program and the internal mental work. Because assuming spiritual identity becomes the key to unlocking this hidden principle.
Well, I had an experience the other day I want to ask you about. So I'm driving home from the office and I passed a fender bender. And, the car has got dents in the fenders and the quarter panels or whatever you call it. And I had a first knee-jerk reaction like, oh, gosh, that's too bad. Those people, nobody got hurt, but, now they got to go through the whole insurance thing. So, but I had that knee-jerk reaction, and then I corrected myself and said, what am I doing? That's not really what I'm seeing here. So can we overcome what we first saw? Like I had that knee-jerk reaction. Can I overcome that with the spiritual truth?
Well, I think like anything else, we develop a practice so that we're not responding to the testimony of the senses. Your default memory, your conditioned response will start to change as you start to develop spiritual identity. To know the truth is what makes us free. To know that divine law is a demonstrable principle that will trump material law. And what we're trying to learn here is, like you said, how to activate divine law in your experience, and especially after you've just reacted to the testimony of your senses, that you believe there's an accident. With practice, the more that you work with this, that is just a belief, that is just a thought about this perfection of being that is really there, which for a lot of people, that's quite a stretch. It almost seems like you're trying to be in denial of what's going on. But it's very different because we used to call that senseless optimism. But that's exactly what we want. But the other thing is that you don't just deny the testimony of your senses. You must abide in the truth. You must know the truth that what is before you is the perfection of being. It is the presence of this divine consciousness. And by having fidelity to that invisible, intangible presence, then it has a profound effect on the external appearance. That's the whole dynamics of the miracle. But you don't just want to deny the testimony of your senses. You really want to abide in the truth of being, so that senseless optimism doesn't mean that you are unconscious to divine law, that you really want to be under the protection of this one divine life.
Well, I'm glad you had mentioned about that, because that was going to be my next question or concern to talk to you about. And that would be, I don't want to appear that I'm aloof about what's going on around me, and I don't want to appear to be not compassionate. So I think that was a little helpful, and maybe if you can drill it down maybe just a little bit more for us.
Right, because it's very important that we understand that this is a demonstrable principle, that you're not just in denial of the testimony of your senses, you are actually trying to activate a different perspective, a different level of understanding of what it is that is before us. And that's the beauty of this. But to understand that spiritual truth overthrows the material appearance, at first that's just a theory. Once it is a demonstrable principle, then this is where the Christian command comes in to heal the sick, reform the sinner, raise the dead. This is something that you can work with on a very pragmatic level.
I think this is a good place to pause to hear a word from our sponsor. So listeners, we'll be back with you in just a few moments.
Snow. That's really cool. Or, it's like you wake up one morning, it's like, you know what? I'm tired.
Kriya Yoga Theory 2 is a unique and revolutionary practice and forum designed to facilitate the growth process in human development. Apotheosis is a real experience and has an evidence procedure. You cannot lead someone to permanent change by doing for them what they must do themselves. Personal accountability and responsibility are the foundation of Kriya Yoga Theory 2. You must be engaged and devoted. Prana power brings virtue to overcome fear, wisdom to overcome ignorance, purpose to overcome selfishness, enthusiasm to overcome laziness. Kriya Yoga is a path of action, knowledge, and devotion. These sessions are a celestial positioning system to guide the individual into union with the divine. For more information or to sign up for your next session online, go to www.ipdtransform.com. Namaste. And welcome back. For those of you just joining us, you're listening to The Voice of Yoga, and we are talking consciousness. Swami, if I can get back to what we were talking about before, about that fender bender accident that I had witnessed the other day, I was thinking that maybe some people who may believe that they have a spiritual nature to them might look at that accident and say, oh, that's part of their karmic debt. Something happened in their consciousness or whatever, and they got to pay back this karmic debt. This is a lesson for them to learn. And honestly, I probably would have thought the same thing, maybe a year or two ago. So how can we overcome that? How do we know that we are on this spiritual path to understanding?
Yeah, to know the truth that makes us free, to know that divine law is a demonstrable principle that trumps material law, and how to activate divine law in your presence really requires the physics of spirituality, that like attracts like. First, we must know ourselves spiritually. We must identify with the spirit within. And then spiritual identity attracts spiritual law, because material, mental identity attracts karmic law. And if that is what you identify with, then that is what you live under. And of course, I love what Mary Baker Eddy says. Mortal mind sees what it believes as certainly as it believes what it sees. So we kind of perpetuate this regressive cycle by fidelity to the sensual, fidelity to the testimony of our senses. But to activate spirit, we must transmute desire from matter and mind to spirit. And spirit is invisible and intangible. It is the void and the nothing. But you can't just do this academically or intellectually. You must become spiritual.
So in the summary, we said divine law comes into your experience through your consciousness. So that's how all this happens. So we have to change our consciousness. Therefore, we have to change how we think, how we view things. So this is a tall order.
Right. But that's why we practice a spiritual science. And again, it's not just a theory. It's not just a belief. It is a demonstrable principle. But of course, we can't have a belief in matter and a belief in spirit. Some indicators that we have a belief in matter would be pain, discomfort, instability in a physical body. And belief in a mind would be fear, anger, negativity. We can't be in the truth of being and experience discord, sickness, suffering. By the same token, just the absence of pain, discomfort, instability, fear, anger, or negativity is not necessarily an indicator for spiritual identity, but that's a starting point that we work with.
And I have met people that come across that they have, like you said, they have an absence of pain, discomfort, and they appear to be very joyful. And so I can't look at that person and say, oh, that's a spiritual being.
Well, not necessarily, because you could still be under the law of karma and have the appearance of good health, wealth, happiness. The difference is that it's finite health, finite wealth, and it can become bad health, can become poverty, because that's the law of karma. What we're really trying to do here is liberate ourselves, this freedom from this law of karma, this cycle of death and rebirth. And the only way that we can do that is to assume spiritual identity, to be like attracts like. And that's what invites the presence of this spirit into our experience.
I can remember you saying in the past that we can't just look at somebody and know what level of consciousness that they have. Does that still remain a true statement?
Yeah. And again, what we're doing here is we're moving away from judging the appearance. To judge righteously on a spiritual level is to know the truth, which means that whatever stands before you is the perfection of being. It is the presence of the divine. And independent of the appearance, that you must hold to the truth. And it's very different when we're a human trying to do this with morality and rules and regulations and thinking humanly. But as we start to move out of these modes of human thought into this divine knowing, then it becomes much easier, because again, you're working with the physics, that if you're in spiritual identity, like attracts like, so you resonate to the truth of your own being as you resonate to the truth of everything that surrounds you.
So I understand that we can't have a belief in matter and a belief in spirit, but at the same time, I have to get dressed for work, I have clothes, I have to eat, so I do have to have a relationship with matter. So how do I have that and then try to have this belief in spirit?
Yeah, the pragmatic benefit of spiritual identity is eliminating the vulnerability to what's referred to as evil forces. So when you are in spiritual identity, you are not vulnerable to anything because you are susceptible to the divine law of life, which means you're under the protection of divine law. And you're forever held, controlled, and governed by absolute love. And your consciousness becomes a transparency for this divine will.
So I can have matter in my life, I just can't be controlled by it.
Well, see, what happens is that what we call the spiritualization of thought. In truth, all is spirit. If we have matter and spirit, we're still under the law of karma. But in the framework of understanding that all is spirit, that's all you're dealing with, that everything, the visible and tangible, the invisible and intangible, are now all transmuted into the presence of spirit. So you completely change the belief in matter into spiritual understanding.
Now, is that what we mean when we're talking about having a kingdom on earth?
Well, see, I like what Jesus said. My kingdom is not of this world. And when we have this revelation that I am eternal spirit, then we step out of this world into thy kingdom. And then you walk in the kingdom of heaven on earth. So you are in the world, but not of the world. You're never drawing from the physical anymore. that your connection is solely spiritual. You sow to the spirit. Your exchange of energy here is that you are giving outward continuously. You're never drawing. There's never any need because spirit has no need. Spirit is fulfilled, perfect, whole now.
And that's what we're talking about when we say heaven on earth.
Right.
So how long does it take? Is this something that's instantaneous, or is this something that we have to practice for so long before we have this revelation?
Well, I like what St. John says in Revelations 1:10. I was in the Spirit on the day of the Lord and heard behind me a great voice as a trumpet. What he may be saying here is that when in spiritual identity, you're now in eternity, and we know this truth. And then another clue in Revelations 3:11, behold, I come quickly. See, there's no lack for divine presence. There's only a lack of awareness of this presence. And so it's not a matter of time, but a matter of knowing the truth. We must know divine presence and identify with spirit to activate it. But it comes quickly. But again, it doesn't happen in time and space. It happens in spiritual identity, in the eternal.
And this is what we talk about when we talk about a shift in consciousness.
Right. This whole thing of ask in my name, which really should mean ask in my likeness. And I like what John says in 14:13, and whatsoever ye shall ask in my name, I will do, that the Father may be glorified in the Son. So again, spiritual identity invites divine will into your consciousness and activates divine law in your experience. When you make your mind an avenue of awareness for absolute silence, absolute stillness, but be sure to know the difference between the rational, the human concept of the absolute, and the absolute.
And another point would be when we're talking about silence, we're not talking about the absence of noise.
Right. That's the human concept. And that's what most of us are accustomed to dealing with because we're sensual. We sow to matter and we sow to mind. And once we start to realize that that is really a false sense of identity, that is a false sense of life, that the truth of our being is absolute and whole and complete.
So we want to be cautious about being vulnerable to evil forces, be aware of how we react to our environment, and then from there we can make those changes and try to have more of a spiritual outlook on those things that are going on around us.
Right. And the best way to do that is to assume your spiritual identity, because most of our reactions, most of the fear that we experience really comes from a defense mechanisms for this concept of this truth of our being, which is our physical form, our physical appearance. This mortal creature that I call me has needs. As long as I believe in it, then I will perpetuate it because it's not self-existent. It is not ordained by spirit. Therefore, it relies on my belief in it for its existence.
Well, I think this is a good place to end our program for today. So listeners, be sure to visit the websites, www.ipdtransform.com. There's a lot of tools on that website that you can further your spiritual developments. Be sure to access Swami's free webinar. You can get that through the online classes tab. That's Wednesdays at noon. Swami, do you have any other final thoughts about today's program?
Well, I would like to encourage everybody to live out from their spiritual identity, the truth of their being, where they're perfect, whole, harmonious, and well. And with that, I'll wish everybody a good day. Namaste.
And thank you for listening to our program, The Voice of Yoga. This is Lisa Winton, along with Swami Jayananda, signing off. Have a wonderful Kriya Yoga kind of day. Namaste.